guys, it's Canadian. So I'm bringing you another first look on the player test over here for the upcoming expansion, which releases in a couple months here. So I'm just checking out the talent trees and seeing what's new for what's going in progress so far. Now, since the expansion is several months away, a lot of this could change, so just bear that in mind for this video here. But we'll cover the Plasmatech today. There's some pretty cool stuff that's going on, and maybe some broken talents here, and I don't know, there's some other utilities here where I'm not quite sure what's going on. So I think this tree is probably going to see a lot of work down the road here. I would at least hope it would, because if it goes live like it is, not going to be good. But we'll just touch on a couple things here. So the column on the far right here, these are all the passives that would make the spec what it is, and they appear to be unchanged from what I can tell so far. So that's pretty good. There is one change to note, though, is you have this new ability now called Durasteel Armor. What they've done is they've taken power yield, and for each Vanguard spec, they've kind of modified it to be unique to that spec only. So what you have for Plasmatech is Durasteel Armor. So what it basically is it functions the same way as power yield does in 6.0. And that's with if you had picked that utility that extended the duration up to 30 seconds if you continuously keep getting hit. So you have potentially in PvP this would make you super tanky, because if people keep hitting you, which is kind of expected, that's always going to happen. But you can have this buff last up to 30 seconds, so that'll give you that 10% damage buff, and your armor is going to be through the roof. So this should be a really good cooldown to push, and it's on a 1 minute cooldown as well, for something that could potentially last 30 seconds and make you super fucking tanky and do 10% damage. So this is actually really cool for Plasmatech. So the other option here in the Shock Strike, and this is just something you get by default at level 23 here, but your 27 tier are different choices that will modify your Shock Strike, so they do different things. So the first one I'll talk about here is Tactical Strike. Your Shock Strike will deal damage up to 4 enemies within 5 meters of the primary target. Now, something to consider when you're going down the tree here is a lot of the talents that kind of supplement your AoE damage might be a little more difficult to pick between, just because what's happened to the class here is you no longer have your flak shell is on a baseline, so you don't get that anymore. So without picking any supplementary talents right now, the only way you can deal AoE damage is with a dot spread and hitting with Ion Wave. You'll have your Artillery Blitz, and both these abilities have cooldowns, so they're not spammable. So the only other thing you have that you could use is Explosive Surge, which on its own doesn't deal a lot of damage. It's not something I would recommend spamming in PvP. I realize it can also spread a dot as well, but yeah, it's not good if your goal is to kill people. But Artillery Blitz and Ion Wave, though, of course, will do damage that will kill people. So you have a bunch of people grouped up. It's really nice. So what Tactical Strike here does is when you Shock Strike something, everything around it takes a little damage as well. So it seems to me like the Shock Strike damage, like the AoE component, so the other targets that are getting hit by it, they don't seem to be taking as much damage as the primary target does. So it's not indicated in the tooltip here what exactly the damage is, but it seemed to me, just based on what I was testing out, it seemed like it was less, but it was kind of an easy way just to deal AoE damage without having to think about it. Your Shock Strike is up fairly often on a 9-second cooldown, so it didn't seem like a bad option to pick from, to be honest. It would have been nice to see the damage be a little bit higher, but yeah. So next one, Heavy Plasma Round. Shock Strike leaves a shock charge on the target, causing your next Plasma Flare or Ion Pulse to set off a charge, dealing 30% more damage. This effect can only occur every 30 seconds. Now, when I first read this, I thought, oh man, this is going to be really good. If you can line up a super strong Plasma Flare, that could really catch a lot of people off guard. But I don't know if this talent is functioning the way it should. It did seem to be increasing my Plasma Flare damage, but it didn't seem to be increasing it a lot. I thought it was a little wonky, and I was looking to see if there was some kind of buff I'd be given when I Shock Strike here, and I didn't see one. So it wasn't obvious to me that I was actually, like, this utility was actually working. And I gotta say, like, the 30-second cooldown on this, that's kind of a downer. I mean, 30% is like a really strong buff to give, so I can understand like wanting to not have that every time, because 30 seconds would just mean your every second Plasma Flare is going to be super buff. So But yeah, that 30-second while you're waiting for it to be useful again, the other utilities could be doing a lot more damage. I feel so. I'm not so sure having like a supercharged plasma flare like every 30 seconds is actually that good. But I could be mistaken on this one. But I'd like to test it out. But I'm not quite sure it's working on the player test server here. So this might be for something to check out down the road, see how this one works out. So the next one here, Suppressive Heat. Shock Strike builds a stack of suppressive heat, increasing the damage of a plasma cell by 25% per stack. Lasts for 15 seconds. This effect can stack up to 4 times. So what happens is when you Shock Strike, you get a buff on yourself, so it's not like a debuff that applies to someone else that eventually will ramp up. So it's kind of nice to it's kind of easy to maintain because it doesn't matter what you're Shock Striking, you're just reapplying the buff to yourself. So that's actually kind of cool. I mean, it takes a little bit to ramp up, but you know, once you got her going, it should be some pretty decent damage. Now, the one thing about PvP though is like it's not as easy to keep using Shock Strike on cooldown as you would think, because there's other things you might need the global cooldown for, like such as you might need to harpoon or use a stun or something, and that might throw timing off a bit on you. So it doesn't, or you could be stunned, or you know the buff you give yourself could fall off conceivably. So you could get some very drastic mileage on this one. Maybe you have it always ramped up and you're fine, and other times it's, you know, you only get like one stack going at a time or something like that, you know. So this is going to be a tier where I'm not exactly sure what's the best. It's going to be a little difficult to tell. I'd say the top two I'd be looking at though is Suppressive Heat and Heavy Plasma. And if it was working, I'm not sure it is, like, but it could be good. But this is something I'll examine down the road. Okay, so the 35 tier here, these are choices on how you would like to be able to close the gap in PvP here. This has PvE use as well, obviously, but this is like a really significant choice for PvP. So the first one I'll talk about here is Blazing Harpoon. So what it does is it gives your harpoon a bit of a dot on it. It's not too much, but it's a little something. And it also applies a snare as well, so not too shabby. But the other option you have here is Storm, which I think is going to be the default for everybody. It's just like a no-brainer kind of pick here, because your Storm only has a 15-second cooldown, whereas Harpoon only has a 45-second cooldown. And with what they've done with Storm is they've also rolled in the Battering Blitz utility into it. So Storm's actually much improved over the 6.0, just basic version you had before. And what Battering Blitz will do here is it'll give you that little, it's 30% run speed buff for 6 seconds there. So it's not too fast, but it's better than what you had before. And it'll give you another chance to use Storm a second time. Now the downside with that second Storm is it will not interrupt your target, it will not apply a route, and you won't get the run speed buff from Battering Blitz a second time. So it really only is just like a second Storm without any benefits, which is, 2 Storms and a 15-second cooldown. That's pretty good. I'm not complaining here. So yeah, that's a really good pick, I think, for PvP. I think it's going to be the best pick, to be honest. And the last one to talk about is Reserve Cables. So this gives your harpoon 2 charges, and it finishes the cooldown on Shock Strike after each harpoon. So it's, I guess, yeah, it's like not a terrible talent. Oh, who am I kidding? It's awful. So yeah, no, just use Storm. All right, so your next tier here at 43, this is something that's going to modify your Incendiary round, and this is kind of a wonky tier. I imagine this is definitely going to see some changes for sure. Now, the first one I'll talk about here is Armor Piercing Round. So this is something that's really new for 7.0, and I think this one's a little fucked up. I don't know how else to describe it. So basically, what it seems to me is what they've done with this is they wanted to have Incendiary Round basically have all its damage dealt up front. So that's why this one basically acts like a little incendiary missile here, so all the elemental damage hits instantly, and this also applies a 7% more elemental internal damage debuff as well. So the really big downside to this using this one is it has a 15-second cooldown, and it also takes away one important mechanic from the spec, so you won't be able to dot spread anymore. The only dot you're going to be spreading is if you tab target Plasmatize on everything. That's it. So that's pretty fucking weak. Now, I think this ability is like the only case I can see where you might consider taking this is for doing operations where you have a single target boss fight, and okay, maybe there's some math that works in your favor with that debuff being applied, but this is like such a bad choice, like in PvP, because you really don't want to give up your dot spread, because if you can dot up like 2 or 3 people just with your ion wave, I can't see armor piercing round here being able to hold a candle just to that dot spread, so it doesn't make sense to me like this is even here. But I think this will probably change. I'd be surprised if it stayed in the game like it is, because it just doesn't make any sense. It's too big a price to pay for something that really doesn't have that big of a payoff, to be honest. So your next choice here is Heated Bolt. This is another single target option here you can pick. So it's like you have your choice between armor piercing round or Heated Bolt, which I think this is going to be, if you're looking at pure single target damage, this is going to be the obvious choice here, because using this doesn't force you to give up your dot spread. Now this is just going to apply a dot on your high impact bolt. And the damage actually seems pretty decent. So yeah, it's not a terrible pick, to be honest. Okay, and the last one we have to talk about here is Prime Det Packs. Incendiary round deals damage up to 4 targets and applies a detonator to each target it hits. When the targets are hit by Ion Wave, each detonator explodes, dealing damage to each target. So this actually seemed like if you just wanted to do something that provided AoE, it seemed not terrible, to be honest. I noticed when I was using it, Incendiary round is spammable, and it seemed the area of effect where it applies these Det Packs to everything is actually pretty big, so it shouldn't be terribly difficult to get these Det Packs spread on people. Now, the damage didn't seem like the Det Packs didn't only... It seemed to me they only did single target damage. They weren't like hitting for AoE, so that you'd have big clusters of AoE going off all at the same time, which would have been cool, but yeah, I can see why you wouldn't want to do that. But it seemed when these Det Packs were applied, it just did like a minute amount of damage as it applied. And then when you Ion Waved, of course, it explodes and it deals more damage. So it seems like, yeah, if you were just looking for a passive way to increase your AoE damage, this wouldn't be a bad pick. So I think for PvP, I think, yeah, Army Piercing Round, like, I don't think it'll be worth using. But I think Heated Bolt would probably be the best bang for your buck in this tier for as far as PvP goes. So talking about the 47 tier here, this is, first one we'll talk about is probably the worst in the tier, is Stealth Scan. It's incredibly rare to have moments where as somebody vanishes and you can put your stealth scan on them and pot them out. It doesn't happen all that often. So the amount of time you're actually using stealth scan in PvP, it's not worth a utility point, to be honest. And they did roll some extra buffs into this thing to kind of improve its function, but it's not worth using versus your other two choices here. And I'm really torn between these two because they're both really cool options. And both of them are kind of brand new to the game, so it's definitely going to require some experimentation here to kind of figure out what's best. But I'll talk about the first one here, Reactive Plating. When activating Adrenaline Rush, you gain Reactive Plating. This allows your next Durasteel armor to gain an additional stack and return damage to attackers, or your next Sonic round will heal allies and grant you 10% damage reduction. So that actually sounds pretty good. Adrenaline Rush for Plasmatech is up more frequently because they have a passive built into the spec, a baked goodie here, that every time you get hit, it reduces the cooldown. So, yeah, you can be a little more liberal about spamming your Adrenaline Rush here because it's going to be up a lot more often. So it's going to either buff your Durasteel armor, so it gives you an extra stack, so it means more damage reduction. So that's pretty good. And the other thing you could do with it here, like, I'm not sure how big the heal is yet because I found it was difficult to test this one out. But the damage... 10% damage reduction, that's actually pretty sweet. So this is actually an incredibly useful talent, I think. I'm definitely going to try it out, and I think I'll probably enjoy using it. So the next one to talk about here is Elite Vanguard. When activating Reactive Shield, you gain 25% movement speed and immunity from incapacitating effects for 6 seconds. In addition, when taking damage from direct attacks, your cooldown on Neural Surge is reduced by 2 seconds, and this can occur every 3 seconds. So unpacking this one here, this is actually really good for PvP for a lot of reasons. Now, the run speed buff that you get from activating Reactive Shield, I mean, yeah, it's a little on the low side, but you know what? It's still good for PvP. I'll take it. And the big component for this, though, is the immunity for incapacitating effect. So that means no one can stun you or hit you with like soft CC, like a flashbang, for example. And that lasts 6 seconds. So if there's like a 6-second window where you can possibly kill somebody and you want to make sure that you're going to get that kill off, you can pop your reactive shield, and for 6 seconds you can do whatever the fuck you want. So that's really good in PvP. What really makes good PvPers noticeable is that they can really control their opponents, and if you can have a defense against that where you can't be controlled, so you can't be stunned, rooted, that kind of stuff, that's really good. So I think that's going to be a really compelling choice here. Now, also, when you take damage, it reduces the cooldown on Neural Surge, so that's your AoE stun. So you lose your single target stun in 7.0. It's no longer baseline, so your only stun at this point is your AoE stun. So if there's a talent that can make that come up a little more often, that will help offset the loss of your second stun. So this is also a really compelling choice for PvP. So between that and reactive plating, I'm kind of torn on what I think is the best. It's something I'm going to have to test out down the road, see which one I like playing with better. So the level 60 tier here, we have Electro Shield. So this is carried over from 6.0. So this will just basically turn your reactive shield into a, it's not quite a damage reflect, but every time you get attacked, it just zaps them from some elemental damage. So if you end up getting someone who's tunneling you through the whole time, reactive shield is up, it actually does some pretty decent damage. But that's pretty rare for people to tunnel you the whole time. So you get some varying mileage on this utility here. Now the next one, your Paralactic Combat Stims. This one's super good for PvP. So anytime you get stunned or rooted or any kind of shit like that, you get 20 energy back, and people are throwing that kind of stuff out all the time. So this is basically going to be talent where ammo for your Vanguard is not quite just set and forget as far as your ammo goes, but for the most part you can keep spamming abilities and you don't have to worry about ever running out. So this talent is that good. Now there's of course exceptions to that rule, but you have to really go out of your way to really burn your energy out, and the 10% damage you get as well is pretty sweet. So yeah, for PvP I think this is the no-brainer pick in this talent. I think everybody's going to be going for this one. And the last one to pick from here, Iron Will. This reduces the cooldown on Tenacity, so that's your main CC breaker, and it reduces the cooldown on Recharge Cells. So, yeah, not a great pick. I think your other two are a little more compelling for PvP. Now, the reason you don't, the reason I'm saying Iron Will isn't that great, because the cooldown on Tenacity is it's a very helpful reduction on that 2-minute cooldown, but you have access to a second CC breaker with efficient tools, so that can break stuns for you. Now, generally, you're not worried about soft CC, because if anything damages you, it breaks. So if someone's trying to kill you, they break soft C, you can do some kind of reaction to keep yourself going. But if you're double stunned, that's what's really lethal. So having efficient tools as a second CC breaker is almost mandatory for that reason. So you don't necessarily need Tenacity to be on a shorter cooldown, because you have that second CC breaker as an option. Now, if people decide not to go for efficient tools, then this might be a more compelling choice here. But is it better than Combat Stims? I don't think so. Not by a long shot. So your 68 tier here, reflective armor. So if you just want to YOLO in some war zones, yeah, you could probably do a little bit of extra damage with this thing here. It's not a great talent for PvP. You have some other things I think are probably more useful. Next one, frontline defense. So this reduces the cooldown on your interrupt by 2 seconds, and you take less damage from AoE. So this would be probably the best pick if you're going for ranked arenas. Because you're really going to need that damage reduction. But for war zones, you definitely don't need this. You can play without it. And the tangling tools, I think this is going to be the go-to for just about everybody for PvP here, because having a snare on abilities is just so useful. I touched on earlier how controlling opponents is the best way of killing them, and putting snares on people is a good way of slowing everybody down. So that's pretty good. So your Eye Impulse and Explosive Surge will be applying a snare, and your Neural Jolt will apply a 50% snare, so that's a pretty strong snare for PvP, so that's pretty cool. So yeah, I think your Tingling Tools is just going to be the no-brainer talent here. So your next tier here, this is where things start cutting a bit deep. Now, the first one I'll talk about here, Guard Cannon. This is more of a choice tactics Vanguards will probably make as if they want the Guard Cannon. But for Plasmatech, it's not really worth it. You don't get a lot of benefit out of the healing from only 4 missiles here, whereas Tactics gets 7 or potentially more, depending on what kind of set bonuses they have and all that shit. But yeah, for Plasmatech, I don't think you ever want to pick this one, to be honest. Not unless they boost the healing. So the Cryo Grenade here, your single target stun, it's no longer baseline, so you have to decide if you want the single target stun back or if you want Hold the Line. So that's the part that cuts deep. Hold the Line is such a good cooldown for PvP. Now, what they did do with Hold the Line is they rolled in all the utilities previously in 6.0 that would buff it. So it would either give it like a less of a cooldown, like 10 seconds off the cooldown, increase the duration by 4 seconds, and it also gave you 75% movement speed as well. So this all got rolled into Hold the Line. So this is a super strong cooldown to have. I think Hold the Line's probably going to be the best pick for this tier, just because the protection it provides you is so good. I think it's probably better than the stun, to be honest. I'll play around with both of them to see how things go, because I'm not exactly sure how the meta is going to shape up, because it doesn't seem like Vanguards are in a bad spot at all. I think you might be able to get away without having Hold the Line now, just based on how things seem to be shaping up. But yeah, this is definitely going to be I'm definitely going to need to experiment. Anyway. And your last tier, yeah, I mentioned efficient tools earlier. I think this is without a doubt the best pick. I mean, just for the CC breaker on Adrenaline Rush alone is probably the reason you want to take this. And with the passive reducing the cooldown on your Adrenaline Rush, it means that second CC breaker is going to be up a lot more often. So, and the other things this passive does are kind of nice to add on top of it too. But the big thing is the CC breaker. Now, the other thing you got here, Sonic Rebounder. It just does a reflect whenever you use Sonic Round. So, nothing too fancy to talk about. This is the same as it functioned in 6.0. And the most difficult thing about using this is to use it effectively is you really need to understand the mechanics of every class in the game and what their burst window looks like and which ability hits the hardest, so that when they're about to use it, you can time your Sonic Round to reflect that thing back. Now, that you have a lot of things to focus on in PvP, and that sometimes is difficult to track to optimally use this ability. So, I mean, you could absolutely do it, but I think for the most part, most people won't get a good value out of it. Not when Efficient Tools is sitting right next to it anyway. So this, I think, for the players that really know how to use this, they'll pick it. They don't need any kind of guidance on that one. But yeah, I think everyone else is going to use Efficient Tools here. And last one to talk about, Paralytic Augs. Now, it could be that there's some arena teams that may require a Vanguard to double stun a target, but then they're going to be covering the Vanguard because he's obviously not going to be able to survive as well without Efficient Tools. So if your job is to lock something down with 2 stuns, that's going to make a lot more classes vulnerable now because they don't have as many ways to react to double stuns. So I think... yeah, this is like a little more compelling pick than it was in 6.0, but I don't think you really need to play this. I think like 99% of people will find this isn't all that useful. Again, because Efficient Tools is so good right next to it here, I think that's just going to be the easy choice for everybody. All right, so again, this is just my first impressions on Plasmatech here. I think this tree probably still has a lot of work ahead of it. And I'm not going to worry too much about damage numbers right now because, I don't have the level 80 gear all set up, and things are likely to change. I don't know what tacticals are going to be available and how those legendary implants are going to come into, because there's a lot of them that haven't been announced yet. So, yeah, lots of things are subject to change here. But, yeah, this is just my first look at it. I see, from what I see of the way that things are going with this spec, though, it seems like I think it's going to do a lot more damage than it did in 6.0. And 6.0, like, the damage for Plasmatech, it wasn't bad. Like, all that elemental damage, like, you really melted people pretty good. Like, it wasn't bursty, but the damage was very strong, very oppressive. So it just melted faces, like, over a short amount of time, whereas something like Tactics, though, it blows people up. It blindsides them with damage so fast that they have difficulty reacting. But yeah, I think in this one it looks like Plasmatech is just going to be a lot stronger. So yeah, I'm looking forward to trying it out. I think it'll be really cool. But well, we'll see how things go. So thanks again, guys. I'll come out with some more videos for my Commando and Scoundrel, and I'm going to touch on my telekinetic Sage as well. That's looking kind of cool. So yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one.